Hundreds of thousands of people marched through London demanding a second Brexit referendum. According to the organisers, a total of 1 million people were out on the streets. Dozens of speakers addressed the crowds in Parliament Square, including MPs, celebrities and campaigners. And meanwhile, a petition calling for Article 50 to be revoked and for Brexit to be effectively cancelled has reached 4.8 million signatures. Well, one of those who spoke to the rally yesterday is the Green Party MP Caroline Lucas. She joins us here now. What was the atmosphere like yesterday?
It was amazing. I mean, the estimates are that there were 1 million people on the streets. And I think what really struck me was that there were so many young people, lots of children, people from all over the country. You know, they were talking about having got up at literally 2 o'clock in the morning to get there from Scotland. There were people from Northern Ireland, people actually from other European countries, UK citizens that have come back to try to make sure their voices are heard as well. So it was very positive, but also, I think, very worried.
I just want to have you spoke at the rally, of course. I just want to pick up on something that you said when you addressed the crowds. You said the Brexit that's on offer is so dangerous and so damaging and so deeply flawed that it would be profoundly undemocratic not to have a people's vote. So I understand, of course, that you think the Brexit deal is dangerous, that it's flawed, but why is it undemocratic?
Because 3 years ago, no one had any idea what Brexit actually looked like. So we had no sense of the detail of what we're being asked to vote on. And I think there's such a gulf now between what we were told was going to happen, this deal that was going to have the exact same benefits, where it was going to be the easiest trade deal to do in history, where we could be still basically having all of the benefits of being part of the club without paying for that. The reality has turned out to be so very different. No one was talking then about stockpiling food and medicines. No one was talking about turning the M20 into a huge lorry park. I think so much new information has become available now that we didn't have 3 years ago, that it's right for people to have that say.
See, at the same time, you know, I spend a lot of time on the show travelling to different parts of the country, talking to people, and I have to say I'm always really struck by just how well-informed people are. And so I guess I would kind of come back at this assumption that people didn't know what they were voting for. Many people feel they did know exactly what they were voting for. They knew there was going to be an economic hit. They knew that there may be delays at Dover, and yet they thought it was worth it then, and they think so now.
I want to make clear that I'm not saying that I think people were somehow stupid or ignorant. I don't think that at all. But I do think that we didn't have the detail of the different kinds of Brexit that could be on offer. And the very fact that, you know, within Theresa May's own cabinet, there is so much disagreement about what Brexit means. I don't think we in Parliament can presume to know what 17.4 million people who voted for leave actually do mean in terms of which version of those Brexits that they want.
But we know they want to leave the EU.
Well, I've been travelling around the country too and talking with them, and I've just been struck by how there are 100 different reasons that people gave for leaving the EU, but one thing they did want was to have a voice, to have a say. And I think there's so much we should be doing to look at how we use a people's vote, if we get it, as kind of a catalyst to look at that wide-ranging social and economic transformation that this country needs. Also constitutional reform, the sense that people outside of London, particularly around the rest of England, feel they have no voice, no say in the decisions that get taken. So I think there were so many issues that were bound up in that Brexit vote. We need to unpack some of those. Citizens' assemblies might be one way of doing that, to look at the way in which the UK needs to reform. But when it comes to the actual decision on whether or not to leave the EU and on what terms to leave the EU, I don't think you can say that you're undermining democracy to be extending it, in a sense, to going back to the people to check that they're happy with that decision. It's a decision of such importance that will affect us for so many generations. Surely we should just make sure.
I was quite struck with the interview with the Chancellor, Philip Hammond. I'm not sure if you caught it or not.
I was on a train, I'm
I thought
afraid,
it might
running
have been.
here.
But he effectively didn't rule out the idea of having a second vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal if it passes. And you, of course, have been having lots of conversations with the government. You've been in to see Theresa May. I mean, what's your sense? Do you think a second referendum might actually happen?
I do think it might actually happen.
And not just wishful thinking?
No, I genuinely think it might, because I think it's the key that unlocks a majority behind any of the other options. So you're right, this coming week we're talking about not just whether or not Mrs May brings back her deal, but the so-called indicative votes, all of these other options that might be on the table. I don't think any one of those is going to get a majority unless it's linked to the idea of having public confirmation via a public vote.
So would you vote for any of the options if it meant having a vote afterwards? Would you accept Theresa May's deal, for example, and some of the other things?
With a heavy heart, I would accept Theresa May's deal if it was intrinsically linked in the very same motion to the idea of it going back to the people, because I think that sense of public consent, public informed consent, which is what I think we didn't have last time, is so vital.
I mean, the big question is, if there is a second referendum, what do you think should be on the ballot paper?
Well, what I think should be on the ballot paper are options that are specific and deliverable. And that means Remain, we know what that looks like, and we do pretty much know what Mrs May's deal looks like, although there's lots of unknowns, but essentially that's the strongest thing that we have. So my preference would be to have those two things on the ballot paper.
Some people would say that there should be an option to leave with no deal, because they would look at that and say, hang on a minute, my vote isn't represented there. Lots of the people who voted leave who will already feel upset at the idea of having a referendum in the first place.
I've thought a lot about that issue of putting no deal on the ballot paper, but I just think it would be so irresponsible for any government to actually leave with no deal, not least because it would mean contravening all of our international agreements around Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement, because if you leave without a deal, you end up with a hard border in Northern Ireland. There's no getting around that.
But is that democratic? If we go back to what's democratic?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think it's democratic to be selling Ireland down the river. I think it's massively reckless, in fact, to be undermining the Good Friday Agreement, the Northern Ireland Agreement, and that potential for that hard border. And secondly, let's not forget that Theresa May has had 3 very strong Brexiteers in that role as Brexit Secretary. She hasn't put in there Remainers. She's put in David Davis and then... I'm tired and I can't remember his name. The next one, Dominic Raab, the very one, and now Stephen Barclay. They are people who have been trying their best to get the harshest Brexit they could, and they've ended up with the deal that's on the table. So if that is the deal that's got at least some consent with the EU...
Well, they would argue that they didn't get what they wanted.
Well, she's had 3 of them. So between them, what I'm trying to say is they should have been able to work out a Brexit that was hard enough for their purposes, but was a deliverable one from the EU. Now, if in the time available, Peter Bone or someone else from the ERG can suddenly miraculously come up with a more hard Brexit that is going to be agreed by the EU, so be it, put it on the ballot paper. But until that time, I think what we don't want are more unicorns, more fantasies. We want something that's specific and deliverable.
Just finally, the papers today are full of rumours about coups against Theresa May. 3 names in the frame for caretaker leader, reportedly David Lidington, Jeremy Hunt. And I have Jeremy Hunt, David Lidington. I'm doing what you did now. Michael Gove. That's goodness me and you need enough coffee this morning, don't we? Apologies to Michael Gove if you're watching. Does the thought of having a new leader of the Conservative Party fill you with optimism or alarm?
It fills me with horror, to be honest. You know, we're in this whole mess because the whole referendum process grew out of a massive row in the Conservative Party and David Cameron trying to keep on board those MPs who would otherwise go and join UKIP. And yet again, we're having another fight within the Conservative Party at the time when we're facing the greatest constitutional crisis this country has faced since the Second World War. I think it is massively reckless and self-indulgent of them. I'm no fan of Mrs May. I think she's almost uniquely incompetent at the job she's been given to do. But the problem are the contradictions within the Brexit proposal itself, this idea about how you get the hard Brexit and you also manage to somehow not have a hard border in Northern Ireland. That is at the centre of this, not the incompetence of Mrs May.
Do you feel sorry
on a personal level? You bet I feel sorry for her. I wouldn't be her for a lot of money.
Caroline Lucas, thank you very much.
Thank you.